welcome. Good morning, Europe. Good afternoon, Asia. To all of you joining us for this latest Jean Monnet lecture on EU-Asia connectivity. My name is Sebastian Bersick. I'm the Executive Director of CEEC, the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence for EU-Asia Connectivity in Germany, here at Ruhr University Bochum at the Faculty of East Asian Studies. Higher education, that's not only what we do at universities with regard to teaching and research, it is also a multi-dimensional sector, and it is by its very nature about connectivity. 15 years ago, European and Asian education ministers met for the first time in Berlin and kicked off the ASEM Education Process. The broader framework, the institutional setting was and still is the Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM, an intergovernmental and interregional process that now brings together 51 countries from Asia and Europe and 2 regional organizations, that is the European Union and the ASEAN Secretariat. In how far has Asia-Europe connectivity in the area of higher education profited from the ASEM process? What is the demand for and role of the ASEM education process? What are its contributions, challenges, and prospects? What are its achievements and shortcomings? And what is the way forward and why? There is hardly an expert better suited to deal with the topic than today's guest, Professor Dr. Azirah Hashim. She is Emeritus Professor at the Faculty of Languages and Linguistics at Universiti Malaya in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia. Amongst others, her previous roles at the university include that of Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Institute and also Director of the Center for ASEAN Regionalism. Currently, she is a member of the steering group for the ASEAN Higher Education Community of Practice, and she is also a member of the Standing Working Group of ASEM Education. In addition, she is the president of the International Association of Applied Linguistics and a Humboldt Ambassador Scientist, Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, here in Germany. Now, before Professor Azirah will begin her talk, let me remind all of you to please put your comments and questions in the Q&A section. Azirah, the floor is yours. Warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for the very kind introduction and for the invitation to speak in this Jean Monnet lecture series. I will just, I'm very glad to be here. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. I will just share the screen now. Okay, my focus today will be on Asia-Europe connectivity in higher education, talking in particular about the role of the ASEM education process. And I will begin by talking about internationalization of higher education, putting it a little bit in context. I will talk about the Asia-Europe meeting, how it all started. I will then say a bit more about the ASEM education process, or the AEP. I will highlight the contributions of the AEP thus far, and then what are the challenges that we have faced, especially in the last few years, the impact of COVID-19, and also I'll talk a little bit about the current international situation, reactions, and increasing tensions, among others. And I end by talking about prospects for the AEP and how can we move forward. Okay, putting it in context, internationalization is a worldwide phenomena. It's a major trend in higher education. And in many countries, we've got internationalization policies, and many universities already have got internationalization policies and action plan to reach targets that they have in terms of internationalization of higher education. Over the last few decades, there's been increasing mobility of students, of people, of academics, People collaborate internationally. Students go from country to country, traveling across regions. There have been many, many opportunities for mobility of people. Yeah, and relevant organizations that actually contribute towards internationalization would be the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Asia-Europe Meeting, the East Asia Summit, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, to name some. And in particular, I would like to add that the European Higher Education Area and also the European Research Area have also actually stimulated the desire for reforming tertiary education around the world, especially in Asia. So over the last decade or so, there have been many, many projects, EU, ASEAN, EU support for education in the ASEAN region, yeah, and many projects, many initiatives that have actually come up with strategies, plans, yeah, reforms that have to do with harmonization of higher education in the ASEAN region. Okay, I start with describing ASEM, which was established in Bangkok in 1996. It is an important platform for ASEM partners. It's a platform where you can discuss, build networks, of mutual interest, share best practices, and also make policy recommendations. So it's an informal intergovernmental forum for dialogue and cooperation between Asia and Europe in actually different areas, the political area, the economic area, and the social-cultural, which includes the educational area. So it has 53 partners. There are 51 partner countries, 21 from Asia and 30 from Europe. And you can see the list of countries given in the boxes. And the other two partners are the European Union and the ASEAN Secretariat. So Asia partner countries, there are 21. You can see them here: Australia, Bangladesh, Brunei, Cambodia, China. Yeah, the list is there. And European partner countries, you can see there are 30 of them in the box. Huh? So the ASEM partners meet biannually for ASEM summits, and they're held alternately in Asia and Europe. And besides the ASEM summits, there are also other ASEM meetings, ASEM education meetings, ASEM stakeholder meetings, and other relevant meetings. The ASEM education process that actually started in 2008 to create an ASEM education area. And this is what I will be focusing on. It is actually organized at two levels. If you look at the slides, so you can see there is the political level and the stakeholders level. Yeah. So the political level would be involving ministerial commitment, representation at ministerial meetings. Okay. And then the stakeholder level, that's the other level. It's dialogue which continues between stakeholders, between policymakers and experts, yeah, within different cooperation platforms and also different events and different projects. So it's actually conducted at two different levels. I'm not sure whether you can see the complete graph, but here is you can see in the slide the ASEM Education Ministers meetings. The first one, as mentioned by Sebastian, 2008 in Berlin, and then held regularly in Hanoi, in Copenhagen, in Kuala Lumpur, in Riga, in Bucharest. And the last one actually was held in Education Ministers was in Thailand in 2021. Okay, so this has been, these have been regular meetings where they discuss actually issues concerned with higher education in both Asia and Europe. Okay, I'll talk about briefly about the characteristics of the ASEM education process. I'm wondering whether the slide is, some of it is cut off. Huh? Okay, the characteristics of the ASEM education process, there are 5, as mentioned by Dang in 2013 and referred to by Munusami in 2021. The first is the cultural and associational process. This is where we have the socialization process. And it's where experts in various fields in higher education especially sit together. They talk about developing mutual understanding, generating rational and tangible outcomes, and knowledge between Asia and Europe amongst higher education in the two regions. Yeah? People involved in higher education in the two regions. The second one would be agenda setting, whereby the governance structure of ASEM facilitates the global agenda setting, and as well as solutions for initiatives and challenges. Yeah. And the third one was the policy transfer process, whereby the ASEM education process has the capability to expedite the learning of regulations, the distribution of good practices between and within Asia and Europe. And then there's the, it's an instrument also for intra-regional integration and building regional integration. So this is also one of the important characteristics of ASEM. ASEM can actually act as an instrument to fortify regional identity, but it also brings together EU partners and Asian partners at high-level meetings. So it's a platform for that. And then multi-level partnerships. Okay, that's a very strong characteristics of the AEP as well. It fosters relationships or partnerships between ASEM partners to achieve common goals and mutual benefit in all the three different areas of ASEM. So this is what I will elaborate on after this. I would have to mention the ASEM Education Secretariat. That was actually, it's a rotating ASEM Education Secretariat, and when it was formed, it was decided that it would be rotated, in Europe and in Asia. So its tasks are many. The main task would be to coordinate education cooperation between ASEM partners. They would actually be involved in the organization of meetings, the ministers' meetings, the senior officials' meetings, the intermediate senior officials' meetings as well. It will monitor the implementation of the ASEM Education Process initiatives, because there are many, many initiatives which have been implemented. So it also monitors the initiatives, provides support to ASEM partners. It has an up-to-date list of what ASEM partners are involved in. It helps to establish expert and working groups, which is what we have now currently. Expert groups, working on various areas of higher education, such as lifelong learning. How does higher education contribute to sustainable development goals? Efforts to actually improve TVET, for example. So it helps to create effective communication between partners. And it was also involved in the ASEM education strategy that was formulated recently, Strategy 2030. And besides that, it also provides a framework to develop and monitor results-oriented initiatives based on the action plan that has been developed as well. So that's the ASEM Education Secretariat. I will talk about some of the contributions of the ASEM education process. Is the ASEF, the Asia Europe Foundation based in Singapore. ASEF is the only official partner, organization set up under ASEM. It's the only permanent institution. It brings together Asia and Europe. It complements the ASEM process. And it is actually, it has a very impressive website. It's got lots of activities going on constantly. It has a large portfolio of opportunities, not just for students, but also they have programs for teachers, for educators, for leaders, for experts, including civil society. And they have actually 7 key areas that they work on. So there's culture, there's education, there's governance, there's media, public health and sustainable development. And if you look at the website, they have events, constantly have events on all these themes. Apart from that, we've got also the ASEM Dual Fellowship Program that's been running for quite some time. That simulates cooperation in education between 2 regions. Fellowships are given to people to actually engage further between Asia and Europe. There's also the Lifelong Learning Initiative, which is currently at the University of Cork, and they've been also actively involved in various projects and events for the last several years. So these are some of the contributions. And if you look at the thematic priorities of the AEP, there are 4 main priorities which are still ongoing. We've got quality assurance and recognition. So these have got to do with recognition of programs, yeah, being able to improve mobility between the two regions. There's engaging business and industry and education. How can higher education work with people in industry and business, yeah? There's also balanced mobility, whereby we have projects which try and balance mobility, but I will talk a little bit about balanced mobility later. And the fourth one is lifelong learning, including TVET. So that's another important focus area of the AEP as well. Huh? And after these four thematic priority areas were formed and developed, two transversal themes were seen to be actually of utmost importance: digitalization and also sustainable development. So within all the four different priorities, what's incorporated would be these two transversal themes on digitalization and sustainable development, and the ASEM strategy of 2030 actually developed strategies on how these can be actually implemented. Yeah, so the ASEM strategy 2030 is quite a recent document, and it has actually come up with formulated various plans and strategies and action plans that can be actually that should be undertaken in the next few years. Okay, what about challenges? Huh? The challenges, I think, have been many in the last couple of years since the pandemic, COVID-19. There's been a lot of disruption and fragmentation everywhere, and especially in higher education. So the AEP, the ASEM has not been spared. Yeah, there's been many meetings which were put on hold, many were postponed, and some were moved to the virtual format. And then there were questions about inclusion and mobility. How do we continue with internationalization? Yeah, in the current state when travel was not possible. Yeah, and then there were lots of disruptions, and actually solutions or the way forward had to be thought out very, very quickly. Yeah, so that's one of the main challenges in the last couple of years. Yeah, so a lot has been undertaken to try and actually strengthen, balance, and inclusive mobility. Many activities, projects transform into online meetings, yeah, online projects. How would we make them that inclusive? This is still an ongoing question, yeah, because although using online, means would actually reach a big number of people, it would also actually not reach places which have not got the adequate infrastructure. Yeah, so there are efforts to look at meaningful interactions. How do you actually get internationalization to happen both together on-site and online? Eh? How do people actually experience internationalization without going out of the country? Yeah? So what is also needed is a supportive learning environment. There's been a lot of space and time constraints, yeah. But then over time, I think people have got used to synchronous and asynchronous learning, and that has become more or less quite a norm now. Huh? And because of this diverse student body, people from different regions, people with different resources, yeah. So there's a need for more efforts to be put in place to include more students in the learning and in the exchange experience. So not only in the AEP, but also everywhere around the world, the pervasive mode of teaching and learning has become the blended delivery mode. So that becomes actually a norm everywhere. Teaching approaches had to be re-looked at, it's become more diverse, it has to be more sensitive to different cultures. It's got to be more student-centered. It's got to be more outcome-based as well. And all higher education institutions have looked at ways and means of making education more inclusive and accessible to everyone. But there are still barriers, yeah. And these are some of the things that the AEP is putting emphasis and looking at currently in its projects and in its initiatives. Yeah, of course, COIL has become very popular, and the AEP has come up with COIL programs between Asia and Europe, which have been quite successful, and other e-learning projects are also currently being developed. So on the whole, I would say that universities have become more flexible in providing access to students. There are more personalized approaches, still ongoing efforts. more opportunities to learn independently. And of course, we have to talk about the digital divide as well. And we have to further discuss synergy with other regional organizations, and how do we actually maintain continuity and momentum. I'm just looking at the time. So I'll talk a little bit about other current international situations, okay, focusing just on two, events that have taken place in the last couple of years. One is the Myanmar crisis, which has affected, to some extent, the AEP and higher education initiatives in the ASEAN region. This is a newspaper article which talked about the last ASEM meeting in Cambodia, whereby Myanmar was not represented because they were asked to send a non-political representative and they rejected it. So at the last ASEM meeting, within ASEAN, that's got 10 member states, Myanmar was not present at all. In terms of education, I think sanctions have not been the same as sanctions for Russia, but there has been a noticeable decline or decrease in participation by academics and students in Myanmar. I think prior to the coup, there had been various EU projects, the Erasmus plus capacity building projects, Erasmus plus mobility projects that often would have Myanmar partners involved. But I think in the last couple of years, there have been actually difficulties with access, with going into and out of the country. So that has actually impacted on higher education initiatives involving Myanmar. But there have been also news about funding being given. So this is one example about EU funding being given to Myanmar, to ASEAN, which includes Myanmar. It's not excluded, yeah. And then there's also another funding that I noticed recently, which is a consortium, a European consortium that provides funding for applicants from Myanmar to be able to actually use online learning and mobility scholarships to actually improve mobility and access to higher education projects, yeah. So that is Myanmar. In terms of Russia, since the invasion of Ukraine, there have been, of course, there have been various sanctions which have been, in very many areas which involve Russia. In terms of education, I would say that, yeah, there have been projects which have been terminated. I see the German Research Rectors Council, which gave a statement that said they would continue to communicate and exchange information with Russian counterparts. And then the Belgian Rectors Council mentioned it will continue as much as possible, but of course, with restrictions in place. And then there was the termination of ongoing grants with Russian public organizations by the European Commission. I think scholarships, the Marie Curie was terminated, was cancelled, but there is a statement that says Russian individuals can still apply, but there will be screening against the EU sanction list. And then there's also statements that Russian students, scholars, academic staff remain eligible for short-term help, assistance, scholarships, but it will all be screened, and I'm not sure to what extent they have been included in the mobility programs or in any of the fellowships and scholarships. Yeah, so there's been actually different statements which have been given out about scholarships, fellowships, assistance for Russia. Yeah. At the same time, there's been a lot of grant package aid given to researchers from Ukraine, and there's been fellowships which have been offered, several for Ukrainian researchers to spend time in different European countries. But another example, the European University Association, they also decided to cease contact at that time. I'm not very sure about the situation now, but within academia, there remains a debate as to whether links between, with Russian institutions and academics should be severed, or whether actions of governments should be conflated with nationalities of individuals. So that is actually still that is being debated, and you see different decisions being made in different places. I note that there are fellowship schemes for scholars at risk, which involve Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. There's also been another grant, SCRIPS, which offers emergency funds for researchers from Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. These are for people who apply under scholars at risk, or these are for researchers who are probably outside the countries. So this is a little bit about the international scenario. Other challenges going back to higher education would be credit transfer system. Although Europe has got a very strong ECT credit system, it is not the same in ASEAN, in Asia. In Asia, we've got a few that have been used, but they're not across the region, not used across the region. There's the ASEAN University Network credit transfer system used by the ASEAN universities. There is the University Mobility in Asia and Pacific credit transfer as well. I think used between Japan and other countries in Asia. There's the Senior Rahead academic credit transfer as well, used by certain universities. So there is not there's a lack of unity. And the EU Project Share proposes a pragmatic approach to credit transfer, because if you want recognition across the regions, then we might have to be more pragmatic about what can actually work. So there is the European credit transfer system and the ASEAN credit transfer system. I think that is still, maybe that's used by some universities, but not in totality, not across the region. And then there's ongoing work done by an expert group on looking at interregional credit transfer and learning outcome systems. So there's a discussion about pragmatic approach that should be taken. So what about the prospects, the way forward? I mentioned the ASEM Education Strategy 2030, which is a document which actually outlines important priority areas, current challenges and how they should be undertaken by ASEM partner countries. It's a very strong, it's a good document with an action plan that goes with it, and that will be monitored by the ASEM Education Secretariat. I think there's a need to look at alternative paths. Internationalization has become, it has to be re-looked at. We have to look at alternative paths for future joint events. What we did in the past is no longer sustainable. We need to look at ways of collaborating post-pandemic. And with all the different tensions around the world, we examine priorities. We have to redefine cooperation and partnerships. I would like to highlight that there are many ASEM education activities which have made a lot of progress. Some of them may not, many people may not be aware of what is being carried out. But if you look at the websites of the ASEM Education Secretariat, also the ASEF website, you will see there are many activities and projects that have been carried out. And the strategy mentions that there's a need for more policy dialogue, there's a need for more communication, there's a need for more visibility, and of course, synergy with multilateral organizations and processes and others. The size of the ASEM group, 51 countries, that is big. So the size actually does impact on cooperation because awareness may be lacking in some countries. There might be projects that involve only certain countries. So that's something we need to look at. How do we move forward? We need to look at the pandemic opportunities for cooperation. And then we need to bear in mind also that, although there are several challenges which are faced by both regions, there might be more challenges faced by the lower income countries, especially in ASEAN. And then the instruments that we have that are used to boost intra-regional, interregional cooperation in the past, the credit transfers, which we looked at a lot, the qualification frameworks. How could we improve these, to ensure that cooperation across the region can be further improved, And how do we actually then look at internationalization abroad and internationalization at home? How can internationalization at home be almost as effective as internationalization abroad? Because with funding difficulties, with pandemics and all that, there will be less flight costs and all that. There will be less travel than before. So we have to look at balanced mobility, what that means to us in the past, what should we be looking at now, what we are focusing more on inclusive mobility and what that means, yeah. So we need to look at mobility policies and practices, you know. So the ASEM education process, okay, it's intergovernmental. Perhaps we should think about maybe more involvement of universities. Academics should be more involved. We should also leverage on all the different networks, university networks, which ASEM, the AP is doing at the moment, but perhaps more focus on that, on all the different networks that exist. And there are many, the ASEAN University Network, the European Universities Alliances, yeah, the Erasmus Plus, you know, the alumni, the Campus Asia Consortia, Marie Curie Network as well. And also we've got the strategy for 2030, which needs perhaps to be linked more to the university's strategic plans for education, research, and outreach, yeah. And these are some of the references. There's been not so much research on ASEM education and the AAP, yeah, but there's been some work. For example, Miandi Munusami wrote a thesis on advancing internationalization of education in Malaysia, focusing on Malaysia, but looking also at the ASEM education process. Then there's been work by Q Andang and others, and Angris as well, who have also looked at ASEM, but more work, more research needs to be carried out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Azirah, for your very comprehensive presentation of and analysis of the beginning of cooperation within the ASEM context in the area of higher education. That is now 15 years ago, and also and the role that the ASEM process takes within this, but also focusing on the, well, let's say the geopolitical aspects. You refer to Russia, for instance, and the attack on Ukraine on the specifically the attack on Ukraine on the 28th of February last year. But also security and developments within East Asia, within ASEAN itself, that is within Myanmar, and their impact on cooperation. So I'm sure we will come to this. There is another level, there is another aspect that you refer to that I find very intriguing as well, and that is the regulatory aspect. You talked about the harmonization of credit transfer systems, right? That is within on the regional and also the interregional level. Within Europe, the Bologna process certainly has triggered a lot of, let's say, even a kind of revolutionary developments. Whereas, but how can that be assessed and compared to the situation in Asia, in Asia Pacific? Well, even the Indo-Pacific, we should mention that concept here as well. Specifically, you refer to ASEAN, you refer to the East Asian Summit, you refer to APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. All of those dealing with higher education, but there is a lack of unity, you said. So how could you elaborate a bit further on this aspect of harmonization on the regional level, and maybe also distinguish or differentiate what is actually meant by region here? We know that ASEAN is a milestone when it comes to regional integration, but there are many other initiatives as well, and the more actors, the more difficult it becomes to agree on specific policies, as you have also pointed out. So where does Asia stand here?
Okay, I'll talk about the higher education regionalization and the efforts that have taken place. As you mentioned, in Europe, you've had the Bologna process for, I think, more than 30 years, yeah? a very, very long time. And mobility is actually quite a norm in Europe, where students can actually spend 1 year in one country, another year in another country, and transfer credits quite easily, I believe. In ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, for some of you who might not be familiar, 10 countries in ASEAN, from Southeast Asia minus Timor-Leste. Efforts have been undertaken in the last probably 15 years to try and actually harmonize the higher education system. We look at what's happening in Europe, the Bologna process, and all the processes that go with that. But ASEAN itself is actually quite different, because it consists of, higher education systems at different levels of development. We've got, Singapore, which is very, very advanced. We've got Malaysia, which is also quite advanced. And then we've got Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and then we've got Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, and so they're all at different levels of development. And we've seen a lot of projects, not just ASEAN projects, but a lot of EU projects. The EU share, which I think only just ended in ASEAN, was quite a long-term project where a lot of money was put into ASEAN higher education to actually focus on quality assurance, on mobility, on credit transfer, to enable actually students within ASEAN to move around like they do in Europe. But before actually that can be really very effective, there has to be a lot of capacity building that takes place. So there's been a lot of efforts on improving the higher education systems in Laos, for example, in Cambodia. And we, in fact, had a project, an Erasmus Plus project, which was building research capacity in Laos with Malaysian researchers involved, as well as researchers from Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands. So that's one example where we try and develop research capacity so that academics will then be able to collaborate more with academics from other parts of ASEAN and also across Asia and Europe. So that's what's happening in ASEAN, at the moment. There's a lot of projects, they're still ongoing because the EU project has come to an end, the EU Share project has come to an end, but there are other projects which are going to start. There's the German Academic Exchange in ASEAN, there's the Campus NAFIC in ASEAN campus, there's a NAFIC and NAFIC Campus France British Council. They're all in ASEAN, and they actually have projects which actually contribute towards this higher education integration in the ASEAN region. Besides that, there's a lot of efforts by ASEAN University Network, the CMU RIHED as well. So currently there's a lot of efforts going on to actually try and harmonize the education system in ASEAN. At the same time, ASEAN also works a lot with East Asia. We've got ASEAN +3, where we have networks of universities working between ASEAN countries and also Japan, Korea, and China. There are many, many networks involving higher education. So the ASEM is another big platform where people meet regularly to discuss different projects and how we can intensify collaboration between both regions. There are many different expert groups, many different projects which facilitate this.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, this is this whole aspect of regional integration processes within the Asian region. That is something that has also been picked up by participants in the Q&A section. I already mentioned APEC here. There is a question in relation to the development of internet technology, and in how far the negative impacts of internet technology are also dealt with in the area of higher education. I suppose that means, is there also a kind of critical understanding of the potential disadvantages. In your presentation, you mentioned the importance of, for instance, on-site and online internationalization, right? Is this critical understanding also part of the ongoing discussions, let it be on either on the governmental or intergovernmental and the stakeholder level? Is there an alternative, for instance, vision?
You mean for internationalization? Digital?
Well, yes, internationalization and the role of internet technology, in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important areas, which is why we've in the AEP, it's been included as a transversal theme, cutting across all the 4 different priorities of quality assurance, balanced mobility, lifelong learning, and also collaborating with industry and business. Yeah, so digitalization has been given a strong focus in the Strategy 2030 document, and it's discussed a lot in the ASEM meetings. In terms of internationalization, we've had to look at internationalization at home. I think a lot of universities are looking at that now, internationalization at home, and how can we carry out internationalization activities which had been going on until the pandemic in the past, where there were exchanges of students, there was mobility across the region and between the 2 regions. So there's been a lot of progress made in this area. Of course, digital technology, it is some universities are able to afford it and some are not. No? So even though we could say that digital, the use of online learning or COIL, yeah, or summer schools using online resources, we might say that they are more inclusive, but on the other hand, they also show the digital divide. There are places where people don't have access, they don't have the technology, and it does affect internationalization at home, internationalization using digital means also. For us at the Asia Europe Institute, the summer school that we had, which used to be physical, and we would have scholarships in the past to bring students from Europe to come to Malaysia, to Asia, and students from different parts of Asia as well to come over. But in the last 2-3 years, it's become virtual. It did actually increase the participation. We managed to get a couple of hundred people, attending the summer schools. But at the same time, I think, without the face-to-face experience, there's only so much that we can do. We can still, have people interacting, exchanging information, finding out, sharing best practices, but there are still limitations. So it is. So these are things we need to think about. How can we? Because I think there's probably no going back to full-time, face-to-face, on-site, totally on-site internationalization activities. There would always be hybrid, or some of them would be virtual. So we would have to think of how to make them more inclusive, more equitable. How do we overcome the inability to access some of this technology? And I know that EU projects have actually contributed in many ways. There's been funding given to, for example, I mentioned project in Laos, to actually buy equipment to actually contribute towards virtual mobility. So yeah, that's an ongoing process.
Yeah, you mentioned internationalization and the need for inclusivity here. There is another more somehow fundamental question that deals with internationalization and is linked to the question whether it actually means Westernization. Yeah, that can be that is linked to the question of identity building. When we think of the European example, the Bologna process, that was also linked to the need for creating European and developing European citizenship and also identity, and in the end to improve Europe's competitiveness. What about the Asian side, so to speak, here? Is that just a kind of norm diffusion that we see? And this is the concrete question, could you explain further in which aspect it has a cooperative meaning for the two regions? So,
yeah, I mean, this has been brought up, this has been raised in about, I think when ASEAN started looking at harmonization of its education system, it's always been raised and discussed that we are different from Europe. ASEAN is rather different from Europe. So while we might actually borrow some of the processes and practices, we are not able to actually take it wholesale because ASEAN is a very different region. It has, many different countries involved. Its higher education systems are very different. So this has been discussed much, and I think it's what has happened in the last 15 years with the European support for higher education in ASEAN. It's not just actually improve the mobility within ASEAN. There's scholarships given by the EU to promote intra-regional mobility, which is what we want as well, that students from our country go to other countries in Asia and not just to Europe, because it's usually students are very keen to go to Europe rather than remain in Asia. So there were scholarships given by the EU to promote intra-regional mobility within the region. And now that SEMA Raihit, which is the Southeast Asian Policy Center in Bangkok, they have actually taken on some of the work that was actually done by the EU Share Project. We had actually developed an ASEAN community of practice, people from different universities all over ASEAN who come together to discuss issues and challenges and share best practices amongst themselves. So this is a platform that's gone under SEMA Raihit. So more will be happening on this platform where ASEAN higher education people will be discussing amongst each other. So while we try and improve the higher education systems within the region, we are also, of course, looking at how we can promote better cooperation between the two regions as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that is linked to a further question that is about the impact of the Erasmus Plus and also Jean Monnet Actions projects on the academic communities at ASEAN universities and the wider public, if any. Do you know if any assessment was made with regard to this?
Yeah. I can talk personally about the two projects that I was handling, the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence at the Asia Europe Institute, University of Malaya, and also the Erasmus Plus capacity building in higher education in ASEAN. The Jean Monnet project was a project that lasted for 3 years, and it was on EU and ASEAN in dialogue. And I think during the 3 years, with all the activities that was carried out, we actually raised a lot of awareness about the EU, and then we had a lot of exchanges between EU and ASEAN. We had specialists from both regions coming together to talk about different topics. So there was greater awareness about EU and ASEAN, EU-ASEAN, the importance of EU-ASEAN dialogue. And we also actually brought together people in the region who were running the European studies programs, and to see what are the challenges that we face in terms of student numbers and how do we attract ASEAN students to do European studies. So that was some of the discussions we had, and it was quite useful sharing experiences about difficulties that we face and how do you promote EU studies or European studies to people in the ASEAN region. Why should they study that? Why should they undertake that program? Yeah, why should they do a degree, for example, in European studies? Why should they do a master's in ASEAN studies, for example? So those are some of the things we discussed. And I think we highlighted quite a bit on what was happening in Europe as well. Yeah, we had ambassadors who talked about their own countries. We had experts and specialists who talked about current situation in Europe, also in ASEAN as well. So there was a lot of sharing of information, and I think raising of awareness, and the project ended. It ended very well, the project. And then the Erasmus Plus, I think since 2016 or 2017, an ASEAN country was able to lead an Erasmus Plus project, a consortium for an Erasmus Plus project. So what we had was a project on building research capacity and research governance in Malaysia and Laos, together with 3 European partners. And that project also went well, although it was a struggle during the pandemic, and we had to switch to using actually online technology for all our workshops and our meetings. So that is another project that went well, and I think it actually fostered collaboration between Malaysians and Laos, the people in Laos, but also between Malaysians and the people in Laos with the people from Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands. So I think those are projects which are very, very fruitful projects, which have actually contributed towards intra-regional mobility, inter-regional mobility as well, because there were opportunities for Laos and Malaysians to go over to, for example, Netherlands, to look at what the university offered in terms of research governance and research skills building. So there's been quite a lot of that that's taken place.
Well, you spoke a lot about, or you have mentioned a couple of times, the question of the issue of awareness and also of visibility. And there is one question here, and that is about India. Does India also feature within the topic we are discussing, that is Asia-Europe cooperation in higher education?
Yes, India is a member country. So India would have actually members who are involved in projects that are implemented by the AEP. So there would be expert working groups, there would be fellowships offered, and India would be also involved in all the projects that have been implemented. In terms of the ASEM Secretariat, so far only Indonesia in the region has been a secretariat. So I think for the next round, currently it's Italy after Belgium. So there would be a need for more perhaps a secretariat in the Asian regions. So there would be opportunities for everyone to participate. I don't know specifically about which projects India is involved in, but I could look it up to try and find out.
Well, India could certainly be leave an imprint if it was to become the secretariat of the education process in the near future. However, this secretariat that should rotate, right? But it
should rotate.
Rotation there is a certain inertia, meaning that rotation stopped. Why is that? Apparently there is. I mean, is that indicative for more hesitancy, if not to say reluctance, on the side of Asian participants within ASEM to play an active, even proactive role? And if so, why?
I think that's perhaps could be one of the challenges, because when they were looking for a secretariat in Asia a few years ago, I think Belgium had to do an extra year. It was at that time not possible. Perhaps it was also the timing, with COVID-19 and, issues to do with finances, because you would have to be able to, allocate some financing for a secretariat. So at that time, it was not possible to find an Asian member who was willing to take over the ASEM Education Secretariat. So eventually Italy offered to be the next one. So it's been in Europe twice already. So for the next round, it should really be an Asian country. And I think there has to be maybe more awareness raising about what the benefits are of hosting a secretariat. The benefits are actually are many, I mean, it does cost some money, but the benefits are many because, the country actually steers, the meetings and organizes the meetings that will be held, and the country will be in charge of the stock taking reports, will be doing the chairman's conclusions. So, and it's an opportunity for raising visibility of higher education systems in the region, actually.
Yeah, it certainly is. There is a new strategy on the European side, and that is the Global Gateway, right, initiative. You mentioned it in your presentation, and there is a question in relation to it, and that is, could you please provide some examples on how the Global Gateway has increased collaboration in the ASEM education process, or more generally, well, and even especially in the digital skills, right?
I'm afraid I didn't mention the Global Gateway, and it's something I just came across, but I think I'm not able to answer that question about the Global Gateway. But in terms of digital technology, the ASEM education process is doing a lot. It's as I mentioned, it's a transversal theme. It's become a transversal theme, and there's the experts group that are working on that. So the digitalization actually it's a big topic, and I think if you look at the website and also what's been done by the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore, there have been many initiatives and many projects which have been undertaken in this respect. I'm sorry, I'm not able to comment on the Global Gateway.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think that's in a way, it doesn't come as a surprise, because as we all know, Global Gateway still has to deliver and still has to be to become more embedded as mainstream, so to speak, in Europe's, in the EU's foreign policy and its different areas, and certainly the ASEM is one area here, and the ASEM education process as well. So that will be something that we will pick up on at one of the next Jean Monnet lectures. Having said that, thank you very much, Azirah, for this interesting and stimulating talk. It is obvious, I would say to all, that cooperation within the area of higher education, of research, teaching, mobility, different kinds of mobility, and especially aspects of sustainability and digitalization are becoming more and more important. And yet it is somehow stunning to see that when it comes to the instruments and fora that exist between and amongst Asian and European actors, there is the potential is not yet used to neither to its fullest extent, nor to even a kind of a modest extent. There is far more. There are many more roles to play, and actors, some of which have already been mentioned, could play a much bigger role here. Thank you to all of you who participated in this Jean Monnet lecture, and we do look forward to welcome you again for our new and upcoming lectures, the next lectures. The technician team in the background did a great job, and we wish you a productive and safe day and week. Bye-bye from Germany.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.